They say history remembers the victors, but sometimes history just forgets. Not out of malice, not out of choice, but because progress moves too fast for gratitude. And in that rush, some of the most extraordinary inventions, the ones that built entire industries, vanish into the fog of time. This is the story of one of them, a motorcycle that should be spoken about with the reverence of a Harley, the respect of a Triumph, and the legacy of a Honda. But instead, it sits behind glass in silent museums, its name unknown to nearly every rider alive today. The Hildebrand and Wolfmüller, the world's first production motorcycle, the spark that ignited everything. And yet, almost no one gives it credit. Picture this. It's Munich, 1894. A cold morning, the kind that smells faintly of coal smoke and wet iron. The streets are alive with the clip-clop of horses. Bicycles rattle past with their chain oil gleaming in the pale light. And inside a small, crowded workshop, 3 men are about to change the world. Heinrich Hildebrand was a dreamer, an engineer obsessed with speed, not in the way racers think of speed, but as a form of liberation. He'd been building steam engines for years, fascinated by how power could move through metal, how motion could come from controlled explosion. His brother Wilhelm was the more practical one, meticulous, grounded, the kind of man who could look at a heap of metal and see a solution rather than a mess. And then there was Alois Wolfmüller, the true mechanic, an engineer who saw the beauty in imperfection, the poetry in pistons. They weren't businessmen. They weren't inventors chasing glory. They were tinkerers, craftsmen, idealists. And their obsession led to a single idea. What if the bicycle, this humble, human-powered invention, could move on its own? It sounds simple now, but in 1894, it was a radical thought. At that time, personal transport meant horses, carriages, or bicycles. Cars were still more fantasy than fact. Steam engines existed, but they were heavy, loud, and dangerous. No one had built a machine specifically to be powered by an internal combustion engine. Every motor bicycle before this one was just that, a bicycle with an engine crudely bolted to it. But the Hildebrand brothers and Wolfmüller wanted something else, something pure, something born to be a motorcycle, so they started from scratch. They built a tubular steel frame, strong but light. They crafted a twin-cylinder engine, water-cooled, displacing 1.5 liters. It wasn't just a mechanical choice, it was philosophical. The twin design meant smoother power, better balance, and a symmetry that gave the machine a strange, organic beauty. But their boldest move was this. There were no chains, no gears, and no pedals. Instead, the pistons were connected directly to the rear wheel. Every explosion in the engine literally drove the wheel forward. There was no clutch, no middleman, no forgiveness. It was raw mechanical power, the kind of system that, if mistimed, could throw a man straight off the bike. And yet, when they started it for the first time, it worked. It roared, or rather, coughed, to life. The twin pistons pumping furiously, the rear wheel spinning, the air filled with the sharp, acrid scent of fuel and oil. It didn't just move, it felt alive. They called it the Hildebrand and Wolfmüller Motorrad. Motorrad, the first time that word had ever been used, a word that would one day define entire cultures, rebellions, lifestyles. When they unveiled it, the reaction was electric and confused. Crowds gathered around this strange, two-wheeled beast. It looked nothing like the bicycles they knew. The exposed engine gleamed like something alive, steam curling from its water-cooled pipes. Newspapers in Germany and France ran headlines calling it the mechanical horse. Some even called it witchcraft. But despite the excitement, the public didn't quite understand what they were looking at. How could they? There were no roads suited for such a thing, no fuel stations, no licensing, no helmets, no laws. The Hildebrand and Wolfmüller wasn't just a new invention, it was a new idea of motion. For a short while, they became something close to legends. Orders trickled in. They began production, real serialized production. It was the world's first motorcycle factory, but the world wasn't ready. Each bike had to be built by hand, and each one cost more than most people made in a year. And worse, The machine, as brilliant as it was, had a fatal flaw. Without a clutch or gears, starting it was like wrestling a dragon. You had to run alongside, push it until the engine fired, and then leap on as it roared forward. Too early and it would stall, too late and it would throw you. Mechanics of the time had no idea how to repair such a thing. Spare parts didn't exist. Roads were rutted, muddy, brutal on machinery. Many early owners simply gave up, their beautiful German motorcycles gathering dust in barns. By 1897, just 3 years after its debut, Hildebrand and Wolfmüller had gone bankrupt. The first motorcycle company in history, gone. And with it, the first motorcycle, forgotten. But while the company vanished, its idea didn't. Just a few years later, inventors across Europe and America began experimenting with their own designs. They studied the Wolfmüller, improved it, refined it. Chains replaced rods, carburetors replaced crude fuel vapors, and soon came the names we know: Triumph, Indian, Harley-Davidson. Each of them owed a silent debt to a forgotten workshop in Munich, because without that first motorcycle, none of the others would have existed. Yet history doesn't often reward the first, it rewards the ones who last. The Hildebrand and Wolfmüller wasn't practical. It wasn't easy to build or easy to ride. It didn't spark a global craze overnight, but it started something far more important, a revolution in how humans moved, how they lived, how they felt free. And still, even today, almost no one knows its name. There's something poetic about that, isn't there? The first motorcycle, the machine that defined freedom, ended up being forgotten by the very culture it helped create. But here's the thing about legends. You can bury them, but you can't erase their echoes. Every time a rider twists a throttle and feels the engine rumble beneath them, that's the Wolfmüller's heartbeat. Every time someone sets out on an open road just to see what's beyond the next turn, that's its spirit reborn. Because the Hildebrand and Wolfmüller wasn't just metal and motion, it was belief. Belief that we could move faster than horses, that we could build something better than what nature gave us, that we could create freedom out of fire. And even if its creators never got to see the empires that grew from their idea, they started it all. When the last Hildebrand and Wolfmüller left the workshop, there was no celebration, no ribbon cutting, no applause, just the sound of hammers stopping and 3 men staring at the future as it quietly rolled away from them. In the years that followed, the world moved forward, but not in the way they imagined. The dream they built in Munich became a ghost, a lesson whispered in mechanical circles. Their machine had proved what was possible, and in the same breath, proved what wasn't. Other engineers took notes. They saw its flaws, its brilliance, its madness. They studied the connecting rods that drove the rear wheel, the water cooling that seemed excessive for its size, the terrifying lack of a clutch. And one by one, new minds began fixing what the Wolfmüller had broken. By 1898, French builders were experimenting with lighter frames and belt drives. By 1901, Royal Enfield had built a motorized bicycle that actually worked for everyday people. By 1903, Harley-Davidson had its first prototype running in a shed no bigger than the Hildebrand's workshop. And just like that, the motorcycle industry was born. But it was born on the bones of that first failure. The Hildebrand and Wolfmüller didn't survive because it wasn't supposed to. It was the prototype of an entire philosophy, proof of concept for a future that didn't yet exist. And like all prototypes, its destiny wasn't to succeed, but to teach. Heinrich Hildebrand never became famous. He returned to engineering, building turbines and steam engines, quietly earning his living. Wilhelm faded into the background, running smaller industrial projects, and Alois Wolfmüller, the man whose name would one day be etched into history books, retreated into design work, sketching aircraft concepts before the First World War. They lived long enough to see the motorcycle become real, but not long enough to see the world thank them for it. Decades later, when collectors and historians began piecing together early motorcycling history, they stumbled upon the name Hildebrand and Wolfmüller. At first, nobody believed it was true that in 1894, someone had actually built a production motorcycle. But the blueprints told the story. The patents proved it. And a few surviving machines, corroded, incomplete, but unmistakably motorcycles, confirmed that this forgotten trio had created something far ahead of its time. What's incredible is how modern it still feels when you study it closely. The way the engine sits low, lowering the center of gravity. The idea of water cooling to maintain performance. Even the frame geometry. It's primitive, yes, but you can see the DNA of today's bikes hidden in its bones. It's almost as if they had glimpsed the entire future, but didn't have the technology yet to make it work. And that's what makes their story so haunting. They built the idea of the motorcycle, not the machine we ride, but the concept of two wheels powered by fire and will. If you strip every motorcycle today down to its essence, the frame, the seat, the engine, the heartbeat, it's still a Hildebrand and Wolfmüller at its core. Different metals, different methods, same spirit. You can trace a line from that 1894 workshop straight to the modern superbike. From the clumsy run-start Wolfmüller to a MotoGP rocket ship that hits 200 miles per hour. It's evolution, written in steel. And yet, even now, a century later, most riders have never heard the name. Maybe that's because motorcycles have always been about the now, the ride, the feeling, the next turn, not the last one. We romanticize the open road, but rarely the workshop that built the road in the first place. But sometimes, the stories worth remembering are the ones that never made it into the victory laps. Imagine if Heinrich or Alois could stand on a modern racetrack today. Imagine them watching a MotoGP start. The engines screaming, the crowd roaring. They wouldn't understand the electronics or the materials or the science, but they'd recognize the soul immediately, because that sound, that deep mechanical thunder, began with their creation sputtering to life on a cold Munich morning in 1894. And here's the beautiful irony. The world that forgot them is built on the freedom they invented. Every biker who's ever leaned into a curve, every wanderer who's taken the long way home, every rebel who found peace in the hum of an engine, they're living a fragment of that forgotten dream. The Hildebrand and Wolfmüller isn't famous because it didn't have time to be. It existed in the moment between eras. Too early for roads, too early for infrastructure, too early for recognition. But without it, the 20th century would have looked very different. It's strange, isn't it? How the first of anything rarely becomes the most celebrated. The first camera, the first car, the first computer. They all get overshadowed by the versions that came after, the ones that were prettier, faster, easier to love. But none of those could exist without someone failing first. And that's what this story really is. Not about a forgotten motorcycle, but about what it means to build something the world isn't ready for. Because the Hildebrand and Wolfmüller wasn't just a machine, it was a statement that progress doesn't wait for permission, that vision is sometimes punished before it's praised, and that the true cost of innovation isn't failure, it's anonymity. So when you ride, think about them. Not out of nostalgia, but out of respect. Because every twist of the throttle, every vibration under the tank, every spark in the cylinder, it all began with three men who refused to believe the bicycle was enough. They didn't just build the first motorcycle, they built the idea of freedom. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest legacy anyone can leave behind. The world didn't give them credit, but we can. Because remembering isn't just about history, it's about gratitude. And for every mile you've ever ridden, every time you felt alive on two wheels, you owe a quiet thank you to Munich, 1894, to the workshop where the motorcycle took its first breath. So now that you've heard the story of the forgotten machine that started it all, I want to hear from you. If you could bring one lost motorcycle back into the spotlight, one bike you think never got the credit it deserved, which would it be and why? Drop it in the comments. Let's give the unsung legends their moment again. And if this story made you see motorcycles a little differently, not just as machines, but as milestones of human ambition, give this video a like so more riders can rediscover this forgotten chapter of history. Share it with someone who loves bikes as much as you do. By the way, if you're new here, welcome to Iron Spirit. Make sure to hit subscribe and press the bell icon so you don't miss the next videos here on Iron Spirit. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.